An immigrant's selfless deed unlocks a shocking secret about his true identity. This was the thought that echoed in Mateo Reyes's mind as he stood before the cracked bathroom mirror in his tiny apartment, wondering if today would be the day he'd finally belong somewhere. The reflection staring back at him, hollow cheeks, dark circles beneath tired eyes, calloused hands, told the story of 6 years in America, each one harder than the last. Outside, Boston's November wind rattled his single window. Inside, the radiator clanked and wheezed, fighting a losing battle against the cold that seemed to seep into his bones, just as the loneliness had seeped into his heart. "Good morning, America," he whispered in his accented English, the ritual both prayer and punishment. 6 years since he'd left Oaxaca, and still the ground beneath his feet felt temporary, borrowed. Mateo shrugged on his worn canvas jacket, the one possession he'd brought from Mexico that had survived the journey and the years since. His mother had stitched his initials inside the collar, MR, her fingers working by lamplight the night before he left. "So you remember who you are," she had said, tears making silver trails down her weathered cheeks. If only remembering were enough. The Eastern bakery where he worked occupied the corner of a busy intersection, its windows fogging with the breath of early morning bread and the steam from overworked ovens. By 5:30 a.m., Mateo had already shaped 200 rolls, his fingers dancing with practiced precision despite the lingering numbness from his walk through the pre-dawn chill. "Reyes, you're on register today," Mr. Chen called out, adjusting his flour-dusted glasses. Jenny called in sick again. Panic fluttered in Mateo's chest. He preferred the back, the quiet communion with dough and heat, where his broken English didn't matter. But he nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yes, sir. I can do." The morning rush came in waves, construction workers in heavy boots, nurses ending night shifts, business people clutching phones to ears, students with backpacks and sleepy eyes. Mateo focused on the numbers, the dance of dollars and cents, the careful counting of change. When words failed him, he offered what he could. A smile, an extra roll slipped into a bag, a patient nod. By noon, the rush had thinned to a trickle. That's when he noticed her, an elderly woman peering through the window, her breath making ghost shapes on the glass. Something about her hesitation, the way she clutched her worn purse with gnarled fingers, reminded him of his grandmother. When she finally entered, the bell above the door announced her arrival with a cheerful jingle that seemed at odds with her hunched shoulders. "May I help you?" Mateo asked. Her eyes, cloudy blue like a winter sky, darted around the nearly empty bakery. I smelled the bread," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Reminded me of something." Mateo recognized the look, the hunger that wasn't just for food. He'd seen it in the mirror too many times. "We have day-old bread," he said, gesturing to a basket near the register. "Half price." She fingered a few coins in her palm, counting silently. "Maybe just one roll." Mateo glanced at Mr. Chen, who was busy in the back. Then, making a decision that felt like the most natural thing in the world, he filled a paper bag with an assortment of day-old pastries and bread. "Special today," he said, pushing the bag across the counter. "All this for price of one roll." Suspicion flashed across her face. "I don't take charity." "Not charity," Mateo insisted, tapping the bakery's logo on the bag. "Marketing. You tell friends about Eastern Bakery, yes? Best bread in Boston." A smile cracked through the mask of pride and caution. "Well, when you put it that way," she handed him 2 quarters and a dime. "I'm Eleanor, by the way. Eleanor Wells." "Mateo Reyes." He took her money, their fingers brushing, hers paper-thin skin over bird bones, his young but weathered by work and worry. "You have kind eyes, Mateo Reyes," she said, tucking the bag under her arm. "They remind me of someone I used to know." After she left, Mateo slipped 60 cents from his tip jar into the register. It was worth it, that moment of connection, of being seen as more than just another immigrant behind a counter. Eleanor returned the next day and the next. Sometimes she bought a single roll. Other times she just came to talk. Mateo learned she lived alone in a subsidized apartment 6 blocks away. Her son, her only child, had died in a car accident 15 years ago. Her husband had passed before that. "Some days," she confided, picking at a cinnamon roll Mateo had insisted was extra, "I feel like a ghost haunting my own life." "I understand," Mateo said, and he did. Ghost was exactly the right word for how he felt. Visible but not seen, present but not belonging. On a particularly bitter December morning, Eleanor didn't come at her usual time. By closing, Mateo had checked the door so often that Mr. Chen noticed. "Looking for your abuela?" he asked, using the Spanish word for grandmother that Mateo had taught him. She's not my grandmother, Mateo said, but he couldn't deny the worry gnawing at him. That evening, instead of taking his usual route home, Mateo walked the 6 blocks to Eleanor's apartment building, a bag of fresh rolls clutched in his hand. He found her name on the directory and pressed the buzzer. No answer. He pressed again, longer this time. Nothing. A woman exiting the building held the door for him. You looking for Mrs. Wells? She asked. Ambulance took her this morning. Fell in her bathroom, I think. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Mateo sat stiffly in a molded plastic chair, the bakery bag now wilted in his grip. When the nurse at the desk finally allowed him to see Eleanor, family only, but she's been asking for you. He found her looking smaller than ever against the white hospital sheets. My guardian angel, she whispered when she saw him, her voice raspy. With bread, no less. I brought conscious, he said, placing the bag on her tray table. Sweet bread from my country. You shouldn't have come, she said, but her eyes said the opposite. I was worried. He hesitated, then added, You are my friend. A bruise bloomed across her temple, and her right arm was encased in a cast. Broke my wrist and got a nasty bump, she explained. But the worst part is they're saying I can't go home. Not alone, anyway. What one? What will happen? Nursing home, I suppose. Her chin trembled. They're already talking to social services. Mateo thought of his apartment, tiny but with that second room he used for storage. He thought of his irregular hours, his precarious status. He thought of his mother's voice. Kindness costs nothing but means everything. You could stay with me, he said, the words tumbling out before he could catch them. Until you heal. Eleanor's eyes widened. Mateo, no. That's too much. I have space, he insisted. Small but space. But why would you do that? We hardly know each other. Mateo shrugged, embarrassed by the emotion tightening his throat. In my country, we do not let friends face hard times alone. 2 days later, against the advice of hospital social workers and with a mountain of paperwork, Eleanor was discharged into Mateo's care. Mr. Chen, upon hearing the situation, adjusted Mateo's schedule to accommodate Eleanor's doctor appointments. Neighbors from Mateo's building, many immigrants themselves, appeared with folding chairs, a better lamp, a floral bedspread to brighten the spare room. Life settled into a new rhythm. Mateo worked, Eleanor rested, and gradually began to help around the apartment, folding laundry one-handed, directing Mateo through recipes for chicken soup and apple cobbler. In the evenings, they watched game shows or old movies on his small television, Eleanor explaining American cultural references Mateo had never understood. You remind me of my son sometimes, she said one night as Mateo adjusted her pillow. Not in looks, David was fair like me, but in spirit, so determined to make things right. The admission hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Tell me about him, Mateo said, sitting at the edge of her bed. And she did. Stories of David's childhood, his love of baseball, his job as an engineer, his wife Sarah, who had moved to California after his death. Too many memories in Boston, Eleanor explained. I don't blame her. As January thawed into February, Eleanor's physical health improved, but Mateo noticed a new melancholy in her eyes. What is wrong? He asked one evening as they shared a meal of beans and rice. Are you in pain? I've been keeping something from you, she admitted, setting down her fork. My doctor called yesterday. The scans show, she took a deep breath. Surin, it's cancer. Widespread. They give me 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. The world seemed to tilt beneath Mateo. No, he whispered. There must be mistake. No mistake. Her smile was gentle, accepting in a way that broke his heart. I've suspected for some time. The fall was probably because I was getting weaker. We will fight, Mateo said fiercely. I will take you to appointments, cook special foods. My mother knew many remedies. Mateo, she reached across the table for his hand. I'm 82 years old. I've lived my life. And these past weeks with you, they've been a gift I never expected. But Mateo wouldn't accept defeat. The next day, he applied for a second job washing dishes at a restaurant nearby. He researched cancer treatments online at the public library. He called his mother in Mexico for recipes to strengthen the blood, clear the lungs. Eleanor endured his hovering with patient amusement. You can't save everyone, my dear, she told him. Some journeys we must make alone. As winter reluctantly released its grip on Boston, Eleanor's strength began to fade like snow in spring. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed. She insisted on returning to her own apartment, though Mateo visited daily, bringing bread and groceries, helping with cleaning, often sleeping on her couch when she had bad nights. It was during one of these visits, as he organized her medications in the weekly pill container, that Eleanor asked him to fetch a box from her closet. "Top shelf," she directed, "the blue one with the silver clasp." The box was heavy, filled with photographs, letters, and documents. Eleanor patted the sofa beside her. "Sit with me. There are things I want you to have, things I want you to know." She showed him photos of her life, her wedding day, David as a toddler, family vacations at a lake house. "I want you to have this," she said, pressing a silver pocket watch into his hand. It was David's. His father gave it to him when he graduated college. "I cannot take this," Mateo protested. "It should go to family." "You are my family now," Eleanor said simply. "The son of my heart, if not my blood." Tears pricked Mateo's eyes as he carefully examined the watch, its weight substantial in his palm. An inscription on the back read, "To David, may time be kind to you. Love, Dad." "There's something else," Eleanor continued, pulling out a manila envelope. "My will. I've had it changed. The apartment, my savings, it's not much, but it's yours." "Eleanor, no. Listen to me," she insisted, her voice suddenly stronger. "I've lived long enough to know when someone is placed in your path for a reason. You saved me, Mateo, not just by taking me in, but by reminding me what it means to love someone, to care again." Overwhelmed, Mateo could only hold her frail hand, his heart too full for words. As they sat together in the gentle afternoon light, Eleanor pulled out another photograph, a family portrait from what looked like the early 1980s. "This was the last professional photo we took with David," she said. "He was 22. Mateo studied the image. Eleanor, younger but recognizable, an older man with kind eyes and a proud smile, and between them, a young man with Eleanor's smile and his father's build. Something about the young man's face made Mateo pause. There was a familiarity he couldn't place. Something in the set of the eyes, the angle of the jaw. Eleanor was watching him closely. "You see it, don't you?" "See what?" Mateo asked, confused. With trembling fingers, Eleanor pulled out another photo. This one a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local engineer and wife volunteer in rural Mexico. David and Sarah spent 6 months in Oaxaca," Eleanor said softly, "building water systems for remote villages." It was 1985. Mateo's heart began to pound. "My village got clean water system in the 1980s, he said slowly. "American engineers came." "Look at the date you were born, Mateo," Eleanor whispered. "And look at David's face. Really look." The room seemed to spin as Mateo stared at the photo, calculations racing through his mind. He'd been born in late 1986. If David and Sarah were in Oaxaca in 1985... "What are you saying?" he asked, though a part of him already knew. "Sarah was 3 months pregnant when they left Mexico," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "They weren't planning to tell anyone yet, but there was an accident, a mountain road, a rainy night. David was killed instantly. Sarah survived, but she was badly injured." Mateo couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "My mother, she told me my father was a local man who left before I was born." "Your mother's name is Lucia Reyes," Eleanor continued. Sarah knew she might not survive her injuries. She made a choice, a desperate, loving choice. She asked Lucia, who had been their housekeeper and friend, to take her baby if anything happened to her. "No," Mateo whispered, standing up, backing away. "This is not possible." Sarah did survive physically, but the grief, the trauma. She couldn't stay in Mexico where everything reminded her of David. She couldn't face raising a child who would look like him, remind her of him every day. So she kept her promise to Lucia. "You're saying my mother is not my mother?" The words felt like glass in Mateo's throat. "Lucia raised you as her own, gave you her name, her love. She is your mother in every way that matters," Eleanor assured him. "But Sarah, she was your birth mother. And David was your father?" Eleanor's voice broke. "My son was your father, Mateo. You are my grandson." The revelation crashed over Mateo like a wave, threatening to pull him under. All these years, the story of his life, his identity, had been built on a foundation he never questioned. Now that foundation was crumbling. "If this is true," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady, "why did no one tell me? Why did Sarah never come back for me?" "Sarah moved to California, remarried eventually. She ... She tried to build a new life, one without the pain." Eleanor's eyes pleaded for understanding. "Lucia sent me letters sometimes with photos of you growing up. But she asked me to stay away, to respect the life she'd built for you. And you did. You stayed away from your own grandson." The accusation hung in the air between them. "I honored what I thought was best for you," Eleanor whispered, "until I walked into that bakery and saw your eyes." David's eyes looking back at me. Mateo sank back onto the sofa, the photographs scattered between them like pieces of a puzzle he never knew needed solving. "The day we met," he said slowly, "you said my eyes reminded you of someone." Eleanor nodded. "I wasn't sure at first. I thought perhaps I was seeing what I wanted to see. But then you told me your name, where you were from. I knew who you were. So the fall needing help, was that all a lie? A way to get close to me?" "No." Eleanor reached for his hand, which he reluctantly gave her. "The fall was real. The cancer is real. But I won't pretend I didn't see it as a chance. Perhaps my last chance. To know you." Mateo pulled his hand away, standing again. "I need time," he said, his voice hollow. "I need to think." "Of course," Eleanor said, though the pain in her eyes spoke of time she didn't have. "Take all the time you need." Mateo walked for hours that night, through streets both familiar and suddenly strange. The city around him, the one he'd struggled to make home, now seemed like part of an elaborate deception. He was not who he thought he was. His mother was not his mother. His father was not some nameless man who'd abandoned them, but an American engineer who had died before he was born. And Eleanor, the woman he'd taken into his home, cared for, come to love, she was his grandmother. His blood. The truth should have been a gift. Instead, it felt like a betrayal. He didn't return to Eleanor's apartment that night or the next. He worked his shifts mechanically, avoiding questions about her. At night, he stared at the silver pocket watch she'd given him, tracing the inscription with his finger. To David, his father's name. On the third day, his phone rang during his dinner break. The hospital. Eleanor had been admitted again, her condition critical. "She's been asking for you," the nurse said. "We've been trying to reach you." Guilt and grief warred within him as he rushed to the hospital. He found Eleanor in intensive care, oxygen tubes in her nose, monitors beeping steadily beside her. She looked even smaller than before, as if she were already beginning to disappear. When she saw him, her face lit with a joy that cut through Mateo's anger like a knife through butter. "You came," she whispered as he approached her bedside. "I came," he echoed, taking her hand gently in his. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything. For not finding you sooner. For dropping this burden on you now." "It's not a burden," Mateo said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "It's just a different story than the one I've been telling myself." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Your mother, Lucia, she loved you so completely. Never doubt that. She did what she thought was best, giving you one true parent instead of none." "I know," Mateo said, and he did. Whatever shock and confusion he felt about his origins, he never doubted his mother's love. "I will call her tomorrow. There are questions." "Of course." Eleanor squeezed his hand weakly. "There's a letter in the blue box. From Sarah to you. She wrote it before she left Mexico. Lucia kept it all these years." They sat in silence for a moment, the beeping monitors a reminder of how precious time had become. "I was so angry," Mateo admitted. "Not at you exactly. At everyone. At life. I came to America searching for something. Opportunity, yes, but also belonging. And now I find out I belonged here all along in some way. Blood is just the beginning of family," Eleanor said. "What matters is love. The choice to love." She paused, fighting for breath. "Like you chose to help a strange old woman. Like I chose to love you before I even knew you were mine." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hospital rooms and hospice arrangements. Eleanor declined rapidly, the cancer outpacing even the doctor's grim predictions. Mateo took leave from both jobs, spending days and nights at her side. Together they read Sarah's letter, a heartbroken goodbye from a mother to the child she would never know, and looked through albums of family photos where Mateo could now see echoes of himself in faces he'd never known. He called his mother in Mexico, a conversation of tears and truths long buried. "I wanted to tell you when you were older," Lucia confessed. "But then it seemed too late, too complicated. You were my son in my heart. I feared losing you to a ghost." "You will never lose me, Mama," Mateo promised. Never. On a gentle April morning, with cherry blossoms drifting past her hospice window, Eleanor Wells took her grandson's hand and smiled one last time. "Remember," she whispered, "you were loved from the very beginning. By all of us." She slipped away as the sun crested the Boston skyline, painting the room in gold. In the months that followed, Mateo learned to carry his new truth alongside the old. He was still Mateo Reyes, son of Lucia, immigrant baker from Oaxaca. But he was also the grandson of Eleanor Wells, the son of David Wells, with roots in the very city where he'd felt so adrift. Eleanor's modest inheritance provided enough for Mateo to apply for permanent residency with proper legal help. He kept her apartment, filling it gradually with a blend of her treasures and his own. On weekends, he volunteered at a community center, helping new immigrants navigate the complexities of American life. A year after Eleanor's passing, Mateo received a letter with a California postmark. Inside was a photo of a gray-haired woman with familiar eyes and a tentative smile. "Dear Mateo," the note read, "Eleanor found me before she died, told me about you, about the wonderful man you've become. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding. But if someday you're curious about the woman who gave birth to you, I'm here. With love and regret, Sarah." Mateo placed the photo beside one of Eleanor and David on his mantle. 3 generations connected by blood, separated by circumstance, bound by an immigrant's selfless deed that had unlocked the truth of who he really was. In the soft evening light, he opened David's pocket watch and wound it carefully, listening to its steady tick, the sound of time continuing, of stories unfolding, of love spanning oceans and decades and the space between heartbeats. Outside his window, Boston continued its eternal rhythm, no longer a foreign shore, but home at last. The place where, through an act of simple kindness to a stranger, Mateo Reyes had finally found himself.